We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. Later in the program, we'll break down the latest decision from the state Supreme Court handed down this Friday, as well as hear from another candidate running to be Wisconsin's top educator. But we start this week with the U.S. military, which has been a focus of President Trump's purge of diversity, equity, and inclusion from the federal government. Now, in late January, Trump signed an executive order barring trans members from serving in the military. That started a 30-day clock for the defense secretary to implement that policy. Now, with much of the future of trans service members up in the air, we're joined by Catherine Goldston, retired first sergeant in the U.S. Army. Now, I understand first and foremost part of your service included a stint here in Wisconsin. What was serving up in Fort McCoy like?
Cold. I was originally from Texas, so this snow was a mystical, mysterious thing, but it was very nice. It was very nice. The people were very nice. The people I served with were extremely nice. I hadn't came out at this point while I was in Wisconsin, but I still have a lot of friends there that I talk to today. So both a few in the military, more out of the military, but, you know, a lot of really good people there.
So I understand that you came out during your time in the service. What kind of support did the military provide?
Sure. So I came out in 2017. So this was, well, I should say early 2017. So I came out under after Barack Obama had made it okay. Removed the ban from Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And this was, I actually started medication, June 2017. And this was like maybe 2 or 3 months before Trump came out with his tweets and everything, talking about his initial ban.
Can you help walk us through some of the barriers that trans service members face?
So, that's a good question. So, for me, being an NCO, and at that unit, I was one of the senior medics at my unit. So, I didn't have a lot of issues with my unit. My commander, my first sergeant were both extremely accepting. All of the troops in my unit. I mean, yeah, they had their questions, of course, but it really didn't affect cohesion at all. And I was also serving as the EO NCO for my unit. So it made it, with me being able to be honest about who I am, made it a lot easier for them to come to me with their issues because I was being honest with them. They were being honest with me. It didn't affect cohesion at all. It actually improved it.
So I want to acknowledge and certainly respect that you had an apolitical role in the Army,
Sure.
and certainly not to invoke politics here, but when you see some of these executive orders come down within the last couple of weeks here, is there anything top of mind for you there?
So, well, first off, my opinions are my own, of course. I don't speak for the military, et cetera, et cetera. I know, and I actually work with, a few nonprofits that help LGBT service members, especially the T portion. And like all the stories that I see time and time again, we just want to serve our country. We want to continue to serve, do the jobs that we were set up to see. Politically, I can't speak on that. I'm not a politician. Because whatever way we vote, the powers that be do what they do. And all I know is that, we're here to serve. Mind you, my time in the military is over. But I know a lot of these service members, their main focus is to get in there, do their job, serve their country, and do it well. Because right now, of the service members that are transgender that are in the military, roughly, 73% of them are senior NCOs. That means that they're the rank of sergeant first class or higher with at least between 12 to 21 years of service under their belt, to include deployments, to include, all of these different missions that they've been on. And there's been no adverse, no adverse reactions or issues with cohesion within their unit.
Are you able to help quantify for us what the military loses out on if some of these bans remain in place?
Oh, sure. So this affects military readiness. So there's two different ways to look at readiness. So you have your individual readiness, right? So that's me going and getting all of my, my vaccinations, making sure that I'm physically capable of doing the job, making sure that my dental is good, etc. Then there's unit readiness. Basically, the commander, has this spreadsheet of all of their troops, and they're like, well, okay, percentage of the troops is this, percentage of the troops is that. Are we ready to step out the door to react to whatever mission comes our way, right? So if the trans service members suddenly are removed from their positions, that's a lot of experience that's no longer there. So like if I was in Korea and I was the first sergeant, they're going to have to find someone else to jump in there that knows nothing about it. That hurts unit readiness. So the experience would be extremely hard to replace at a moment's notice. Now, yeah, we try to make things, we're trying not to have any single points of failure within a unit, but there's some of those key leadership positions that are extremely difficult to fill. That be your commander, that would be, your NCOICs, your OICs of certain departments. But a good unit is going to have backups prepared to step in at a moment's notice. But that's not always, without fail, right? So it's extremely difficult because that's a lot of money, a lot of resources, and a lot of talent that is lost.
First Sergeant Catherine Goldston, thank you so much. Now, I also spoke with a retired Lieutenant Colonel Caroline Jensen, a groundbreaking female aviator, about the importance of diversity in the military. For example, in 1993, that was the first time that the Air Force allowed women to fly in combat roles. And we pick up our conversation with her there. So 1993, that doesn't seem like too long ago. For changes like this in the military, does it take a certain significant amount of time there?
I think so, and I think that's part of why we decided to come up with diversity and equity and inclusion. I think when we say DEI, it's almost coming out like a four-letter word, and it's the narrative around it is that it means something negative, but what it means is that we open up these roles to a variety of different people, right? Diversity is a variation. And if you're wanting to solve a problem, you don't want to look at it one way, right? So you need to look at it from different angles, and people with different life experiences will look at things different ways. I think inclusion is important too, like just being included in a group. Like, we're the greatest country in the world, and we have freedoms, and one of the freedoms is that you can grow up and be whatever you want. So I think that's important too, to include all those different people. And then, and as far as equity too, being fair and impartial. Just giving people a chance. Our enemies are coming for us, right? And that's a whole nother thing. Like you think about a Navy SEAL, you think about boats and ships on the water, and you think about takes on the ground, you think about airplanes in the air. Well, guess what? There's also space now. And there's cyberspace, like there's a whole space force that was created for a reason, because that's a whole separate mission. And our enemies are working in those domains. And so it's important that we recruit all that talent, right? And we may get to a point where it doesn't matter how fast you run a mile, if you can hack a computer, or you've got some great computer skills, or you understand engineering or science, like that might be more important than, how fast you run a mile. So, I mean, that's even diversity of thought right there, right? And it's a problem set, and we have to guess what our enemy is going to do, and we have to train to be able to meet that challenge. And it doesn't necessarily look like it did in World War I and World War II and Vietnam.
When we come back, Wisconsin's chief election administrator can remain at her post due to a new state Supreme Court decision this Friday. We'll break that down with Elections Commission Chair Ann Jacobs right after this. Welcome back. On Friday, the Wisconsin Supreme Court handed down a unanimous ruling that Megan Wolf, the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, can remain in her post. That's due to this idea of holdovers, that an appointed state official can stay in place after their term expires as long as there's no replacement named for them. Now, 2 years ago, the 6-member board that oversees Wisconsin elections used a parliamentary procedure to keep Wolf on as a holdover. We're joined now by the chair of that board, Ann Jacobs, and I first want to get your reaction to that ruling.
I was very much delighted by the unanimous decision of the Wisconsin Supreme Court to affirm that Megan Wolf is properly in her position and legally holding over in that spot. So I was delighted by it.
And can you tell us broadly what it will mean for Wisconsin for Wolf to remain in her role there?
Certainly going forward into our April election, having Administrator Wolf at the helm to make sure that things run smoothly, I believe is absolutely essential. I'm also aware she's not going to be with us forever. I'm certain she will have other opportunities in her lifetime, but I'm grateful that she has given us the time and effort she has. I hope she stays on, but certainly if she does not, as you mentioned, she is a nationally recognized expert in election matters, and I'm confident other people would love to have her on their staff.
Chair Ann Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us. When we come back, Ellie LaLiberte sits down with one of the candidates running for DPI superintendent. Our interview with Jeff Wright right after this. Welcome back. We continue our series of sit-downs with the candidates running to be Wisconsin's next superintendent of public instruction. This week, Ellie LaLiberte sits down with Sauk Prairie Superintendent Jeff Wright. Here's more.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us your background in education.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. My background in education has been pretty varied. I've been a big city principal, but I've also been a rural superintendent, and I grew up in Stevens Point, the son of 2 teachers. So, as I said, I started in Stevens Point as a kid. That's where I really fell in love with education and decided I wanted to become a teacher. I was a high school teacher for a while, both U.S. history and American government. Then I went to grad school at Harvard, and when I came back to the Midwest, my wife and I decided to move to Chicago, and that's where I served as a high school principal on the city's south side. I did that for about 9 years, and then we decided to move to Wisconsin, and it felt great to come home. We moved to Sauk Prairie, and that's where I've been a district leader for 13 years. The past 6, I've been the superintendent. And I think that diversity of experience, both big city principal, but also working on the Dane County, Sauk County divide, has helped prepare me to support districts of all varieties across our state. We have districts that are really large and have different needs. We have districts that are really small and have unique needs. And I've been able to navigate both of those worlds and hope to bring that experience to the Department of Public Instruction.
And so I kind of want to piggyback off of something you're talking about here, which is supporting those districts. So we're going to start with, MMSD here, second largest school district in the state, had to go to, like many other districts across the state this year, go to referenda. What are some things that you would do to support those larger school districts from having to need to go to their voters for more money and things like that?
I think it's important that we're talking about school funding right away. Our state has an over-reliance on local property taxes to pay for our schools. And we see that because almost every district in the state has now had to turn to the property taxpayers and ask for approval to raise those property taxes to keep school programs alive. That's a sign of a broken finance system. Districts should not have to turn to the taxpayers over and over again to go to referendum. The current property tax system, the current school funding system, was put in place when I was a high school student up in Stevens Point. And I've been a school educator now for 27 years. It's time for us to revise that formula so that we don't have to rely so much on property taxes, whether you're in MMSD or you're in Mauston or other communities across the whole state that have struggled to make sure that their programs can stay well funded. One of the key areas that we can fix this is through special education reimbursement. When I was in high school, the state paid for about 60% to 2/3 of special education costs. Now that's down to about 29%. Well, those are essential services for kids. We have no choice but to make sure we're providing those services, but they're expensive. If the state used to be paying for 60% and now is only paying for 29%, MMSD has to pay the difference. Sauk Prairie has to pay the difference.
And you kind of touched on this, but I want to pick your brain a little bit about rural districts. We have some districts in our viewing area that are at risk of dissolving if they don't get a referenda that passes. So how do you support smaller districts who don't have as many resources?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Mauston is certainly a district right here in the viewing area that is talking about that. And I talk with Joel, their superintendent, pretty often. We both became superintendents the same year and got to navigate COVID together. They're going to referendum for the third time in a row on February 18th, the same day as our primary, to try to generate the funds to be able to keep the district open. What a terrible place to be. This past October, the Wisconsin Rural Schools Alliance named me their Administrator of the Year. And I think it's in part because of the work that I've done as a rural superintendent to bring the community into the schools again and try to find ways that we can engage community differently to make sure that we have the community support. So how can small districts continue to operate? I mean, that's part of the core of your question. There are opportunities for us to partner across districts to make sure that we're providing good programming for kids. In Sauk Prairie, we've recently expanded our medical careers programming, so CNA certificates, phlebotomy certificates, specimen processing. Not all the smaller districts around us could do that. And so we welcomed their students to come and take the classes that are offered through Madison College on our campus.
And so, a big part of this is talking funding, working with, the governor and the Republican-controlled legislature. How would you plan to work with those two entities to get the funding that you say, is so needed in districts right now?
Yeah, and this is part of the relationship that's broken right now. There isn't a healthy relationship between the Department of Public Instruction and the legislature, and there needs to be. That should be an essential partnership. The current state superintendent was the only agency head not invited by the Joint Finance Committee to testify during the last biennial budget process. But public schools are the largest part of the state's budget. We have to be at the table if we're going to fix these things. I think some of the experience that I get to bring to this role is that Sauk County, where I get to be superintendent, is the most purple county in all of Wisconsin and one of the most purple in all of America. It voted for Obama twice, then Trump, then Biden, then Trump. I mean, it's hard to find another county that has that sort of balance politically. But as a superintendent, I have to make sure that everybody feels welcomed at the table because our community is so evenly split politically. And so is our state. I think that we want education to be a nonpartisan topic. I've had the chance over the last few months to visit with Republican county parties, with Democratic county parties, with civic leaders, with faith leaders, with business groups, and I find that most of the questions that people are asking are the same no matter where I go. And I've joked with some of the Republican county parties and Democratic county parties, like, why don't we have these meetings together? Because when talking about public education, we really do want a lot of the same things for our kids and our communities. So I hope that I can bring that bipartisan or nonpartisan approach to our state capitol and restore the relationship between the department and the legislature and get a seat at the Joint Finance Committee hearing again so that we can talk about these funding issues in really plain terms. Talk about them in partnership with each other so that we can solve problems of school funding, of our lackluster scores in reading, the historic achievement gaps that we continue to face. We can't solve these problems if the adults are bickering with each other. We need to stop the fighting at the Capitol and release funds to schools that have been promised so that we can solve these problems once and for all.
And so I kind of want to touch on that. It's standard. So a big conversation during this race is the cut scores. So like lowering those scores that happened back, I think it was around the summer. So tell me a little bit about what you thought of that decision.
Well, I've heard over and over again that nobody wants to lower the standards that we set for Wisconsin's kids. And I agree with that. I think that the hardest part of this change put in by the current state superintendent was the timing. And this has been a really unusual time to be an educator and a really strange time to be a student. Coming out of the pandemic, schools put in new supports, new interventions to help kids address learning loss that they experienced during the pandemic. And we're finally over that hill. The only way we can determine whether or not we've really closed the gaps or adjusted to those learning loss, the learning loss experienced by kids is by judging them by the same consistent metric. And unfortunately, now that school feels more normal again and these interventions have been in place for a few years, right as we're getting to the finish line, the state superintendent changes the cut scores, changes the standards. And my team, why I was so bothered by that is that we felt really good about the progress that we were making. Our teachers were adjusting the way they were teaching. We were providing different supports to kids, and we were really looking forward to seeing year to year, what does our progress look like? And then in the summer, the standards changed, and so we can't compare the 2024 apple to the 2023 apple and the 2022 apple. So the timing was really unfortunate. I think that was a mistake. I think that's why the legislature and the governor both spoke out against, or many members of the legislature and the governor spoke out about the way that this was handled, and lowering standards for kids and the way that it was communicated. But my pushback is also on the timing of this. We really need to know whether or not our students are back on track after the pandemic, and that requires a consistent standard year to year.
We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. Believe it or not, we are less than 2 weeks away from an election right here in Wisconsin. The state's spring primary is February 18th. Now, early voting has already started, and the city of Madison tells us they are facilitating 10 early voting sites, including 5 in churches yet today. All that information about what's on your ballot can be found at the state website, myvote.wi.gov. That does it for us this week. I'm Will Keneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.